That was when I did our bank activity. So we would do it 2 times a week, and I knew nothing about banking. So it's not like a bit where like I think it's fairly easy because I know what I'm doing. It was like literally like let me just spend 3 hours reading just to figure out what the fuck it is. So then we went through it. Yeah, I was hired like in 2016 and like reading my own computer. And then they like picked it up after that. I mean like literally from March to like December. So I don't know.
To our hearing, both those that are in the room and those that aren't in the room. Before we start, I think it's important again to note what's going on all around us, and that is the acknowledgement of racial injustice that has gone on for far too long in our country. I certainly support those who are speaking out and making their voices heard in a peaceful manner to bring about change. While change does not always come easily, I want to remind those watching this hearing today that change is possible. In December 2018, the First Step Act, which I introduced, became law, and I worked in partnership with several Republican and Democrat senators. Senator Durbin was the lead person for the Democrats. This law is the most significant criminal justice reform in a generation. A lot of people didn't think it was possible, but we did it by working together in a bipartisan way. We're also working together in other ways to address racial disparities, such as in health care, the CARES Act, and other COVID response efforts aimed to help all, but especially minority populations that have been hit hardest by the virus. We've knocked down financial barriers to receiving care through the pandemic and provided support to our frontline providers to ensure access. We continue to focus attention on the devastating effect of COVID has had on nursing homes and the need to do better for residents and staffs. The Trump administration has announced a number of efforts to address the disparate impact of COVID-19 on African Americans and others, and I ask at this point unanimous consent to insert a document along those lines in regard to those efforts. I hear no objection, so ordered. We're also taking action beyond COVID. We're working on a bipartisan effort to tackle this tragic issue of maternal mortality and the need to improve outcomes for mothers and babies. All Americans want lower prescription drug costs, but our efforts are especially important as minorities suffer from the high rate of common disease such as diabetes and hypertension. We're exploring improvement for those with kidney disease, patients in need of organ transplant, and more beyond that. We're also in the middle of a transformation of our child welfare system. We know that too many children end up in foster care and that black children are overrepresented in this system. And thanks to our bipartisan efforts, states are now transforming the way that they operate to keep more kids safely at home instead of placing them in foster care. There's obviously much more to be done, and I look forward to working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to continue those efforts. Now I'd shift to my remarks to focus on our topic of our hearing. As a result of COVID-19 and related state stay-at-home orders, millions of Americans across the country have lost work. Congress passed the CARES Act to provide help to those affected in many different ways, including by temporarily expanding unemployment insurance. These increased UI benefits have played an important role in helping those who lost a job or who couldn't work as a result of the pandemic. Given the need to act quickly to reduce the spread of COVID-19, providing extra help through the unemployment system made sense as a way to reduce the economic impact of stay-at-home orders. But now we're facing a much different situation than we were in mid-March. States are reopening. Employment recently turned positive. We need to shift our focus to helping people safely return to work, making sure businesses are able to come back quickly, and to put the country back on a path to economic growth. We've also learned a few things since the CARE Act became law. The CARE Act provides an additional $600 per week to those receiving UI, representing the gap between the U.S. average weekly wage and the average weekly UI benefit. One thing we've learned is how poorly targeted the additional $600 per week was. As it appears, most recipients are being paid more on unemployment insurance than they were when working. This, of course, discourages people from returning to work or taking a new job, thus delaying the recovery. Recent research published by the University of Chicago estimates more than two-thirds of the UI recipients may receive benefits that exceed lost earnings, with more than 20% potentially getting double what they used to earn as long as they don't work. Some will say this is just an academic paper and that these extra payments aren't really an issue today. Those folks saying that haven't been reading the many letters that I get from Iowans each day, and I'm sure every member of the committee is hearing the same thing. Businesses having a hard time bringing people back to work, or from hard-working constituents earning less than others they know who are getting unemployment. Let me share a few stories from letters I've received. Letter number 1, my daughter went back to work voluntarily because she wanted to help ensure the company would still be around after COVID-19. Many of her co-workers chose to stay at home and due to the $600 extra per week are making more than she is. This isn't right. Now, letter number 2, Senator Grassley. I'm a small business owner who is in desperate need for additional employees, yet I receive very few applications when I post jobs. The issue is the additional unemployment. With the additional $600 per week, my potential employees make more on unemployment than they would working. Letter number 3, we're trying to hire back laid off COVID-19 related employees or anyone else as well for $15 an hour, and we find that they're receiving equivalent of $20 an hour in unemployment benefits. Suddenly, the government became our competitor. The question to me then from this constituent, how could that happen? These letters represent a small sample of those who write in daily with concerns about the unemployment payment of $600 extra on top of what the state gives. Based on these letters and others I'm sure we've all received, you'd think everyone would agree we need to find a better way to help those who have lost income. But you'd be wrong. Despite mounting evidence of the problems these extra payments are causing, the House passed a bill recently to extend them, not just for a month or two, but for another 6 months through January 2021. Given this, I asked the Congressional Budget Office what impact these additional payments might have if continued. Here's what they said. Roughly 5 of every 6 recipients would receive benefits that exceeded the weekly amounts they could expect to earn from work during those 6 months. Employment, continuing to quote, employment would probably be lower in the second half of 2020 than it would be if the increase was not extended. In the calendar year 2021, employment would be lower than it would be without extension. That doesn't sound like a recipe for economic growth, especially given last week's jobs report, which shows people are returning to their job and that millions more expect to return soon. I know everyone is focused on these extra $600 checks, but let me remind everyone of the other CARES Act policies that continue past July. First, the CARES Act allows those out of work as a direct result of COVID-19 to get UI benefits through December. This includes people who are infected or caring for someone infected, those who can't go to work because their workplace is closed due to COVID-19, and those who rely on daycare that's not available as a result of the pandemic. Second, individuals get an additional 13 weeks of unemployment if they're still unemployed after state benefits run out. And in states where unemployment rates remain high, further weeks of benefits will also be available. And most importantly, the CARE Act provides funding for what are called work-sharing programs. Under these programs, instead of laying off employees, businesses with reduced hours can pay employees a partial UI check to offset lost income. States can also use it to bring back workers on a part-time basis if they can't fully reopen for a while. And don't forget, UI is the only game in town here, or it's not the only game in town. The CARES Act includes many policies to help those affected by the pandemic, including the Employee Retention Tax Credit, the Paycheck Protection Program, direct payments to individuals, and other policies designed to help businesses reopen and people to return to work. The UI system will continue to play a very important role in addressing the impacts of the pandemic. However, our efforts must be coordinated to help workers and businesses in a way that is most productive. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today to learn what's worked, what hasn't, and discuss how we can make sure our efforts in Congress can best support a strong economic recovery at the same time we're trying to help people who are hurting. Now, I call on Ranking Member Wyden. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing. There is lots to discuss today, and I'd like to start with Friday's jobs report. The President celebrated like it was the greatest victory in America since the end of World War II. And I want to start by trying to give this a little bit of perspective. Speaking conservatively, more than 20 million Americans are still out of work today. And my guess is you're not doing a whole lot of celebrating if you're among the many people who don't know how they're going to pay rent or put food on the table this month. watching the president celebrate in the midst of this jobs crisis is yet another sign that Donald Trump just doesn't understand what it's like for people born without a real estate portfolio. First, I want to walk through how the Senate got here, starting in March. The pandemic hit, the economy went into lockdown, and unemployment shot into the stratosphere. So when the CARES Act negotiations began, Democrats made our bottom line an expansion to unemployment benefits that would bring more workers into the system and fully replace people's lost wages. Throughout the negotiations, and they went on for days, Secretary Scalia said that couldn't be done because the states run unemployment programs on Bronze Age technology that cannot crunch the numbers for individual workers. Senate Democrats said that doing nothing is just unacceptable when you have this hurt from sea to shining sea. When Secretary Scalia failed to offer a plan to get benefits out in a timely way, Democrats proposed a flat sum solution, $600 per week across the board on top of traditional benefits, adding up the full wage replacement for the typical worker. So let's fast forward now to this afternoon. The pandemic is still killing thousands of Americans each week. The nearly 2 million new unemployment claims filed last week triple the highest number of claims made in any week during the Great Recession. It is a national scandal that African Americans are not only dying of COVID-19 at much higher rates, they're also suffering vastly more economic pain than virtually anybody else. Black unemployment is disproportionately high. And because black people have systematically been excluded from opportunity and wealth in America, it's a lot less likely that they have the financial resources to weather the storm. For the president to say the recovery has arrived and everything is turning into sunshine is just going to perpetuate the economic injustice. The bottom line is the crisis is going to go on a lot longer. If the Trump administration and Senate Republicans start yanking out these key pillars of economic support, like supercharged unemployment benefits, much of which go to the lowest paid folks in the workforce, Main Street businesses nationwide, so many of them hang on by a thread. Workers could lose their homes and fall through the cracks if the Senate is not in their corner. So, like the chairman, I want to respond to a few arguments that I've heard coming from the other side, arguments against supercharged unemployment benefits. First is the idea that Americans who've lost their jobs in the pandemic are just plenty happy to sit around instead of going back to work. In my view, that is dead wrong, and it's an insult to American workers. It's also a misunderstanding of how the system functions. I've been talking to out-of-work Oregonians throughout this crisis, and what I hear overwhelmingly is they want to work. They want to work. They want to get back to their jobs. They believe deeply in the dignity of work. They want to earn their pay, support their families, and return to their lives, the lives they had before this pandemic. And most importantly, they know that the path to getting ahead in America is moving up the economic ladder rather than being on unemployment. Second, members of this committee have said it's somehow unhealthy for people to get unemployment benefits during the crisis. I sure think this is out of touch with the realities people are facing in this crisis. These benefits are what's saving millions of jobless people from hunger and homelessness in the middle of a pandemic. Forcing people back into a contagious workplace also further spreads the virus that has killed 110,000 Americans and turned nursing homes nationwide into scenes of tragedy. Third, I've heard talk among Republican senators of cutting the expanded benefits, possibly just saying, let's cut them in half. So I want colleagues to really get this one straight. Between the CARES Act and Fed lending programs, big corporations are getting trillions of dollars in support to weather this crisis. And now Senate Republicans are saying, well, we're just going to cut what the little guy gets, maybe in half. The system's already rigged to favor the powerful and the wealthy. The Congress sure shouldn't stack the deck any longer. Our unemployment insurance system created in the 1930s should have been modernized long ago to cover the gig worker, the self-employed, the freelancer. Long ago, benefits should have been tied to economic conditions on the ground. I also believe Congress should examine whether a federal approach for administering unemployment benefits could do a better job than the quilt of 50 different state systems operating today. Nobody predicted the volume of claims we're seeing. But whether it's due to neglect or political sabotage, too many of these state systems are failing the people who are desperate for help. I'm going to close with one final thought. American workers are not to blame for the jobs crisis that the country faces today. By now, everybody has seen images of cars stacked up for miles at food bank distribution centers around the country. I gave out food just recently at one of them. Colleagues, these are modern-day bread lines. With so many people out of work, America is on the precipice of an eviction tsunami, particularly in the black community. Supercharging unemployment benefits, fully replacing people's lost wages, bringing gig workers and freelancers into the system was the right thing to do. And I know that's not just the opinion of Democrats who got it done, because right now the president absurdly is taking credit for the expansion in misleading campaign ads on the airwaves right now. It is also a fact that every Republican member of this committee voted to strip the expanded benefits and slow down their distribution. And at least a few turned around and then sent out press releases touting the expansion that they voted against. Colleagues, that is some serious chutzpah. So the Senate now has a choice. It's about fairness for the tens of millions out of work. It's about fairness for African Americans who are disproportionately suffering. It's about fairness for the blue-collar worker who looks around and sees a whole lot more support going to a bunch of multinational corporations than to hard-hit workers like them who've done nothing wrong. The only choice is to make an extension of supercharged unemployment benefits, and to do it now. Mr. Chairman, I look forward to our witnesses, and again, I want to thank you for scheduling the hearing.
Thank you, Senator Wyden. Our first panel is one person, our Secretary of Labor, so I'll give a short introduction. Secretary Eugene Scalia was sworn in as Secretary of Labor September 27th last year. He has served in a number of high-level positions in and out of government prior to his appointment. He has served as Solicitor of Labor, the department's top legal officer, also as a special assistant to the Attorney General, and as a partner at a law firm. The Labor Department plays a very central role in overseeing the new federal programs intended to help workers and their families respond to the virus pandemic. Secretary Scalia, please proceed.
Chairman Grassley, Ranking Member Wyden, and members of the committee, thank you for the invitation to testify today. Last Friday, the Labor Department issued a very encouraging jobs report. 2.5 million jobs were created in May versus expectations that we would lose 7.5 million jobs. the unemployment rate dropped nearly 1.5 points instead of rising 5 points as projected. Moreover, the survey period for that report ended in mid-May. Since then, many, many more Americans have returned to work. Our economy has turned the corner against the coronavirus. All of us welcome that news, and we celebrate it, Ranking Member Wyden, not because we think the job is done, but because we know the situation has begun to improve more robustly and earlier than had been expected. But we're also mindful that millions of Americans remain out of work. In mid-May, unemployment was still at 13.3%. Fortunately, in March, President Trump and the Congress acted swiftly to address the economic hardship of the virus. The CARES Act, as we've heard, provided an additional $600 a week in unemployment benefits on top of those provided by the states. By contrast, in the so-called Great Recession of 2008-2009, the additional federal payment was $25. The Act also extended these benefits to independent contractors and the self-employed, who ordinarily do not receive unemployment. And in the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, or FCRA, President Trump and Congress made $1 billion available to states to help them administer their unemployment insurance programs. Ranking Member Wyden, thank you for your letter last week acknowledging that after these laws were passed, the Labor Department, quote, took important steps to ensure these benefits were made available to workers as expeditiously as possible, end quote. We dispersed the $1 billion in administrative funding to the states within a day or two of each state certifying it had met the criteria set by Congress. This enabled the states to hire more staff and improve technology. We swiftly provided state guidelines on implementing the CARES Act. Less than 10 days after CARES was enacted, we had issued the essential guidance states needed to administer the programs. The first state began making CARES payments April 4th. We've been in constant communication with the states, including 14 different webinars for state personnel. I personally participated in 2 large briefings for state unemployment insurance directors and have spoken with more than 20 governors. Still, we know that too many Americans have waited too long to receive unemployment benefits. State unemployment offices were overwhelmed. Before this year, the highest number of unemployment claims filed in a week was 695,000. This spring, in 2 weeks in a row, we had weekly filings nearly 10 times that previous record high. We had 6.6 million 2 weeks in a row. On top of that, many states have antiquated computer systems as much as 40 years old. I spoke to one governor whose system was so arcane he had to bring in computer programmers from Latvia. Members of this committee will recall when CARES was being written that I cautioned about the age of these state systems and urged the Senate to use a different means, and I did identify different means, to pay unemployment during the crisis. Fortunately, unemployment claims are now declining. States have hired more staff. They've made enhancements to their computer systems. They're reducing the backlogs of claims. And Americans are returning to work. Going forward, our department has these goals. First, continuing to help states make prompt unemployment payments to workers entitled to them. Second, ensuring program integrity. We are working with our Inspector General, other federal agencies in the states to address fraud and the criminals preying on the system. Third, we'll work with states to help Americans transition back to the job safely. The $600 benefit was an extraordinary measure to help Americans who were shut out of the workplace in a closing economy. As the economy reopens, I appreciate that members of this committee do not want the CARES benefit to be a deterrent to resuming work. The best thing for workers is work, not unemployment. Thank you again for this hearing on this important subject, and I look forward to your questions today.
We will have 5-minute round for questions. I'll start, and then Senator Wyden, and then I'll go down the list as follow the usual course we do for our hearings, according to first come, first serve, unless you're at the table when the gavel falls. Mr. Secretary, based on our witness today, all of our witnesses today, and a request sent by Democrats to the Department of Labor Inspector General yesterday, it seems that my Democratic colleagues plan to highlight problems Florida has had in distributing UI benefits. But as I remember when the CARES Act was being developed, you warned states would have a difficult time dealing with the unprecedented surge in application for benefits, let alone implanting many new programs on top of that. Many of us warned state UI systems would have major problems, and unfortunately we're right, but it's not just Florida. One other state where I heard, the state of Oregon, a person running the program resigned because of troubles with the program. That would be another state plagued with issues. I'll ask you if that's correct, but before you answer that, my main question is, what is your department doing to help put states on better footing going forward?
Well, Mr. Chairman, as I mentioned, there was just an entirely unprecedented surge in claims during the months of March and particularly April. We've never seen anything like it in our history. And it came at a time when unemployment had been so low that the unemployment offices were shortly staffed. That added to the challenge together with the technology. We began working with the states even before CARES was passed. In February, we were starting to talk to states about ways that they could be using their unemployment systems to help get benefits out to people. When CARES was enacted, we moved very quickly in a variety of ways. We've issued 19 different guidance documents to make the requirements clear. We had the essential guidance out to the states within 10 days of enactment. We, as I mentioned, have had a number of webinars. We've been in essentially constant contact with the states. We've also put them in touch with something called the U.S. Digital Service, which is a tech group within the Executive Office of the President. It ordinarily helps federal agencies with technology problems, but we made that resource available to the states as well as our own Chief Information Officer. We provided them flexibilities to increase staffing as well, and we also moved as quickly as we could to get the FCRA funding out, that $1 billion, within a day or two of getting the information from the states that they'd satisfied the criteria. We got the money out. So it's been a subject of great focus, Mr. Chairman, but we know there still is work to be done.
I have one last question at this point. We've seen in recent weeks that states are reopening businesses. People are adapting to new guidelines about social distancing and mask wearing, and these changes are allowing economic activity to resume in many different ways. You run an agency that gathers a variety of data points on jobs and the economy. What are some of the things that you're seeing in the data, and try to tell us good signs and troubling signs?
Well, Mr. Chairman, the most troubling sign, of course, has just been how many Americans have had to file for unemployment. It's much more than we saw, for example, in the so-called Great Recession in 2008, 2009. We recognize the hardship that's meant for those people and for their families. That's been the most troubling thing. The good news we saw Friday. 2.5 million jobs created at a time when we thought we had lost 7.5 million. That's what the experts were forecasting, a 10 million job swing, unemployment going down when people thought it was going to be going up. And Mr. Chairman, that was nearly a month ago, because as you know, that survey was taken in mid-May. We know that since then, more states have reopened. People have been returning to work across the country. And when I look at Friday's jobs report, I see very good news. For example, many in retail went back to work. Many went back to work in leisure and hospitality. But I see other areas where people have not yet gone back to work, but we can be confident they will. One is healthcare. We lost about 1.4 million healthcare jobs, I believe, in April. We only put about 300,000 back in May. Those jobs will come back. So there still is important work to be done, but we are making progress, and programs in the CARES Act are helping.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Now, Senator White.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. It's going to be a long day, and I'll just say, Mr. Chairman and Secretary Scalia, I've been a little puzzled to hear your simultaneous claims that workers are going back to work and the $600 a week benefit is deterring them from returning. Both these claims can't be correct in my view, and we're going to want to examine it. Now, let me start this way, Secretary Scalia. Reopening the economy when it is safe is a good for everybody situation. The experts tell us, though, that if people choose to go back to work before it is safe, the pandemic will last longer, more people will die, and the economy will suffer. Now, I believe that most employers want to do the right thing and keep their workers safe, but they can't do it if they don't get clear guidance on what makes a safe workplace in the COVID era. The Department of Labor has failed completely on this issue. The law is clear that a person cannot be kicked off of unemployment if they turn down a job because of unsuitable conditions or a health or a safety risk. Enforcing these rules is crucial during a pandemic. On May 19th, along with more than 20 senators, I sent you a letter about this issue. I have yet to receive a response. So, Mr. Secretary, let's see if we can get this off to a decent start. Will you commit here and now that the Department of Labor will provide safety-first guidance in writing to ensure that nobody loses their unemployment insurance benefits because of risks to their health or safety? So that's a yes or no question.
Ranking Member Wyden, you mentioned clear guidance. That's actually been one of the principal focuses of the Labor Department. I know we're here to talk about unemployment insurance, but when it comes to health and safety in the workplace through OSHA, we have been putting out extensive guidance. I think nearly 20 guidance documents.
My time is short, Mr. Secretary. A yes or no answer to the question with respect to the guidance that more than 20 senators asked you about.
As I was saying, we've put out approximately 20 guidance documents on how to make the workplace safe so that workers can return. That's been an area of great focus. That clear guidance is what we're aiming to do. In terms of the return to work that you ask for, that is, to a large extent, a function of state law. We don't want workers coming back to unsafe workplaces. That's why we've made such a priority of explaining for them and employers what's needed to make them safe. However, if it is safe, the workers should come back. We want them to come back. And if they feel it's unsafe, it needs to be something that's rooted in the facts, not just a generalized fear. But that's a topic generally covered by state law, and the states have some latitude in how they handle it.
We asked you about a federal matter, and nobody ought to be forced to choose between their health and their income. And I believe states, employers, and workers deserve some clear safety-first guidance on the issue more than 20 senators asked you about. And if you're okay with taking away, a lifeline to send people back to unsafe jobs in the middle of a pandemic, I think that's wrong, and I think it's inhumane. Now, a couple of other issues because time is short. Do states have the capacity right now to implement 100% wage replacement on an individual basis? As you know, we talked at length about this during the negotiations. You said they didn't have it. So now we're talking about what may have changed. So we need to know, do states have the capacity now to implement 100% wage replacement on an individual basis?
2 points in response, Ranking Member Wyden. First, just to be clear, we have never suggested that workers should sacrifice health for returning to work. We oppose them being put to that choice as well. Second, as to the state systems, I would welcome the opportunity to talk to you about this further. You and I have had 2 or 3, I think, really, from my perspective.
Secretary, we need an answer on the record today, because that was one of the big issues in the days and days of negotiations we had. I made it clear that what I wanted was 100% wage replacement.
And Senator, as I was saying, we've had some valuable conversations from my perspective, I hope from yours, and I look forward to the opportunity to discuss this with you further. I think actually the states have made some progress and are in a different place than they were before, and so we could talk about it further.
But can they do it? Can they actually do wage replacement on an individual basis now? That was why we had to go to this rough justice kind of approach. And I think you're still telling me that they don't have the capacity to implement 100% wage replacement on an individual basis today. And so that is still going to be a major issue.
Respectfully, sir, I did not say that. I said we should talk about it.
I asked you whether they had the capacity to do it, and you wouldn't answer the question. So I'll look forward to getting anything else you'd like to offer. So, Mr. Secretary, how many people are out of work today without any benefits?
That data is very hard to track for a couple of different reasons. Ranking Member Wyden, as you know, the unemployment data that we put out last week, for example, was already from 3 to 4 weeks ago. So we don't have an exact fix on the number of people.
Well, what's a ballpark? You're the Secretary of Labor. You're the guy in charge. How many people are out of work without any benefits?
And if I could finish, the second piece of data that we don't have is a precise count now of who has received the benefits. We receive weekly reports from the state on that. But again, those are 2 very fluid pieces of data. I would simply be guessing if I tried to tell you, as we sit here today, compared to where we were 3 to 4 weeks ago in the jobs report we put out, and then with state numbers that, again, are not current either. I'd just be guessing if I gave you a number. What we do know is that Americans are returning to work in large numbers. That's very good news. But we know
what we know. Let me tell you what we know for sure, Mr. Secretary.
That will need to be addressed.
Mr. Secretary, what we know for sure is that more than 20 million people are out of work now. And we know that about 2.5 went back. And those 20 million people are disproportionately found in those sectors where the wages are really modest. And I gather if you and others have your way, a lot of those folks are going to face evictions, and they're going to face evictions in a matter of weeks, and we are going to fight for something else, which is to make unemployment benefits tied to economic conditions. That relates to a marketplace. That's something that I think we could be working on together. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cornyn.
Secretary Scalia, thank you for being here. I thought we were unified as a Congress and as all Americans to try to deal with this pandemic, both on a public health and a economic front. But apparently that's not consistently the case. Sometimes our bad habits come back and we descend into partisan accusations and question people's good motives. But I'd like to ask you just to remember with me what we did in the CARES Act, which included this enhancement for unemployment insurance. We were worried that not only were we in the middle of a pandemic, but that people, through no fault of their own, as a result of mitigation efforts, would not get any money, any pay. And so we decided to make a direct payment to them through the Treasury Department, direct deposit. The second front was to make sure that we expanded and extended unemployment insurance benefits. That would be what I would consider sort of the second tier of support for individuals who, through no fault of their own, found themselves out of work. The third thing we did was pass the Paycheck Protection Program, which now is we've appropriated $670 billion to incentivize employers to maintain their payroll, their employees on payroll. And then the next thing we did is through the Federal Reserve to appropriate money that they could then lend according to Treasury Department rules under their Main Street lending facility. This was a historic response to an unprecedented situation. And I know the ranking member disagrees about the $600 enhancement, but there was an amendment that was voted on in the United States Senate. People worried about what you pointed out, not wanting to disincentivize people from seeking work because they got paid more not to work. I agree with that concern. We should never pay people not to work. We should try to help them get back to work. But as I recall, the vote on the CARES Act was unanimous in the United States Senate. So trying to suggest that we did not support assistance through the unemployment insurance system to workers is false. So I just want to make one comment, too, about the Texas Workforce Commission. In my state, that's the folks who administer the unemployment insurance assistance. They experience the kind of things that you described earlier, a crush of applications, and they've done the best they could, and they've added personnel and resources in order to try to be more responsive. But I wonder if our goal is to try to fight this virus and then also at the same time to fight the economic fallout associated with it, do you think there are better ways than incentivizing people not to work by paying them more not to work than to work? Are there better ways, in your opinion, to help people get back in the workforce?
Well, Senator Cornyn, first, the CARES Act really was, as you say, an extraordinary piece of bipartisan, virtually unanimous legislation. The programs that you've described, I think, are part of the reason that workers are able to go to back to work now. They were kept in contact with their employers through the Paycheck Protection Program. They were given financial support through the unemployment insurance benefit, which was a very good benefit for a closing economy. Savings right now are nearly all-time highs. Now, that's in part because people have been kept in their homes, but it's also because of the benefits that were made available through the Treasury Department and through the unemployment insurance program. Going forward, I think the single best thing for bringing workers back to work will be taking the necessary steps to ensure the economy revives. Before there can be a job, there needs to be a thriving business. The President had delivered us an extraordinarily thriving economy with record low unemployment, with wages that were rising and rising more quickly for lower wage workers until the virus struck. So I think we keep those policies in mind as we look to bring people back to work, to keep our economic base strong. And I know that there's also been interest, I see Senator Portman eyeing me intently, there's also been interest in possibly providing a bonus that might further incentivize people to come back to work. And that's something else that's been discussed as another way to get people back to work, which again is always our first preference over unemployment when we can provide it.
Now by television, Senator Stabenow.
And thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Secretary Scalia. We thank you for being here. This is a very important discussion to be having. I do want to stress at the beginning, Mr. Chairman, that certainly the pandemic is not over. The crisis for families, the challenges for small businesses certainly aren't over. And this, I hope, is going to mean that we're going to have additional action on the floor of the United States Senate to be able to address the continuing needs of Americans. I also want to add to what Ranking Member Wyden said about the discrepancy. On the one hand, Mr. Secretary, you're saying that so many people are going back to work, It's great people going back to work. We certainly all want people to go back to work and people in businesses to reopen, but at the same time saying people are going back to work, but the $600 extra help to workers and families survive the crisis is stopping people from going back to work. So I think it's pretty tough to argue both sides of that. The reality is, I can tell you from Michigan that the provisions in the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program and the additional $600 in weekly benefits have really been a lifeline for workers and families and employers in Michigan. And it's helping people put food on the table and meet basic needs. And those aren't just words, that's a reality for folks. I also want to say that the increase in weekly unemployment benefits has helped employers in our state that have signed up for WorkShare. And I want to speak about that and get your reaction to that, because in Michigan, an employee that signs up for WorkShare can reopen at their own pace, reducing employee hours by as little as 10% or up to 60%. The employer pays part of the wage, as you know. The unemployment system pays the other part of it, including the $600, and it's created a real incentive for people to go back to work. People want to work. People in Michigan work hard. They want to go back to work, but there needs to be a bridge, a way to be able to do this, and WorkShare has allowed our employers to retain their talent, save money on salary costs as they are reopening, and ensure that employees have a livable wage. So, and that's over 1,400 businesses so far in Michigan using WorkShare, as well as over 70,000 jobs. So, Mr. Secretary, I wonder, instead of debating whether or not we should allow the CARES Act to have strong unemployment provisions or whether or not they should expire, I hope we would be talking about WorkShare and how to expand it. You know, it's 25 states now and it needs to be expanded. So could you speak about how we could further lower the barriers so more states can develop their own WorkShare programs and what you are doing to promote that?
Thank you, Senator. First, I agree that although Friday's jobs report was exceptionally good news, that the economic challenges that Americans are facing as a result of the coronavirus are not over. Our job at the Labor Department to help the states make sure people get unemployment benefits is not over, nor is our job to work with the states to help people return to work. So we very much appreciate that. But that said, that report is one to be celebrated for what it tells us about how robustly and how early our economy began reopening in May. The $600 benefit, as I've said, was a really important thing that this committee, Congress, and the President did to help workers during a closing economy. And I actually agree that there are a number of reasons that workers should prefer to be back at work.
Mr. Secretary, if I might, just in the length of time that I have, could you speak to WorkShare and whether or not you are reaching out to businesses to let them know about this as an important way to be able to bring people back to work while maintaining a livable wage for workers? Is that something you've been focused on?
It is something that we've looked at, Senator. Ordinarily, the concept behind WorkShare is it's a way of helping a company that might have to have layoffs keep people on a part-time basis. But we do agree it can be a way of bringing people back, albeit on a part-time basis. It might work well in a restaurant, for example, that can't go to 100% capacity. We have been speaking to the states about doing that and about working with them to help set up those programs. But just to finish on the $600 benefit, because I want to be clear, it was an important thing to do to help workers back in March. What we're talking about now is Congress set it to expire in July, and my point is simply that recognizes we'll be in a very different place in July where the opportunity for people to return to work will be far greater.
If I might, one other thing I want to ask, and that relates to safety in the workplace. People want to go back to work. They have a right to know that their workplace will be safe. And in fact, if there is a concern from workers that their workplace is not safe, they should not have to return until it is. And I'm very concerned that the guidelines you've talked about are voluntary guidelines. They're not enforced. They're not requirements of the CDC or OSHA to make sure that workplaces are safe. There's not strong enforcement. And so what we've seen over and over again is people in workplaces getting COVID-19, being infected, healthcare workers, over 38,500 healthcare workers that have been infected, 358 and more dead as a result of that. We know that in meat packing plants, we have had over 3,000 people test positive, and workers that have died because there are not requirements to keep people safe in the workplace. So people just want two things. They want to know they will be paid for their work, a livable wage, and they want to know it's safe. And so I would like very much for you to tell us that you will enforce safety standards for workers in this country as they go back to work.
Absolutely, we will. We have put out extensive guidance to help workers and employers understand their rights and obligations, but we also have rules and statutory authorities to enforce. We are conducting investigations, and we are responding to whistleblower complaints to keep workers safe on the job.
Okay. Senator Thune, before Senator Thune starts, I'm going to ask Senator Wyden, when Thune's done, would you call on Senator Menendez by virtue or by TV? I'm going to step out just a minute. Senator Thune.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Scalia, for taking time to be here today. This is important oversight. This is what we've talked about, hearing from those who are implementing the many bills that we passed, what's working, what's not working, how we can improve, what we can do better. And I think that will shape and inform and guide our decisions about future action that Congress might take. On the forefront of the coronavirus pandemic, we have passed now 4 pieces of legislation, if you count last week 5, to address the coronavirus medical emergency and the economic fallout associated with the pandemic. These bills are providing assistance to the American people through economic impact payments, student loan deferments, other programs, and tax incentives to help keep businesses, I should say, keep individuals employed. And I think that's has been working. Obviously, we can't start spiking the ball yet, but the numbers that we saw last week were certainly encouraging, and I think evidence that some of these programs, particularly the Paycheck Protection Program, has had the desired effect, is keeping businesses functioning and keeping workers employed. The Secretary, it's already been noted that as businesses begin reopening their doors, that many are struggling to rehire furloughed workers due to the disincentive created by the $600 per week supplemental unemployment payment, though individuals are supposed to be ineligible for unemployment insurance if they turn down an opportunity to return to work. What are some of the challenges that you envision states facing in identifying instances of individuals collecting unemployment benefits after refusing an offer to return to work?
Well, Senator, if I could say, first of all, I think there are many reasons that workers will want to go back to work. I think all things equal, people like being in work, especially perhaps after having been at home for 2 to 3 months. So I think Americans are excited to get back to work. But as anybody who has studied unemployment insurance programs knows, at the margins, there is always a certain population that, particularly if there's an opportunity to have an equal or greater income not working, that there is a certain number of people that will choose not working. And that's a challenge that is recognized to exist. And particularly as we look toward a reopening economy after the expiration of the current benefit in July, it's something that needs to be kept in mind. We have been reinforcing with the state, Senator, from very early on their obligation to ensure that people who are on unemployment certify that work no longer is available, to coordinate with employers that are calling people back to work. This is an unusual circumstance where we've got hundreds of employers at a time in a state bringing workers back, and so that's an opportunity for the state unemployment insurance agencies to take note that the jobs are returning and the workers can return too. We'd like them to keep an eye on that. And then, as I mentioned, we've been spending a lot of time, including working with our Inspector General, to address the possibility of fraud in the unemployment insurance system. Employers or supposed employers engage in it, third parties engage in it, and sometimes workers do too. And that's something we've been asking the states to look at as well.
Good, thank you. As you well know, unemployment offices in states across the nation continue to be overwhelmed with claims, even as the Americans begin returning to work. And in addition, states' unemployment systems are dated. These two factors will unlikely make any additional changes to unemployment programs potentially overly burdensome on state unemployment agencies. So could you explain a little bit about what worked after passage of the Families First Coronavirus Response Act and the CARES Act in terms of the Department of Labor helping states adapt to some of the system changes that are required by these two laws?
Sure. FICRA provided us $1 billion to give to states to help with unemployment insurance administration, and they were able to use that money for staffing and also for technology enhancements. I made it a priority at the department to disperse those funds absolutely as quickly as we could, and I think that we succeeded in doing that, and that did help. The flexibility they had to bring in staff was certainly helpful to them. They were in a period where unemployment had been so low there wasn't a need for much staff. They needed to bring people in quickly, train them. Over time, they were able to do that. And then, as I mentioned, there were technology problems. We found that there was a problem with a computer program we run called ICON, which the states use. We fixed that over a weekend within 3 or 4 days of learning of the problem. We were able to remedy that, and that at least helped the states deal with one of the technological hurdles they faced. As I mentioned, we also put them in touch with our chief information officer and with something called the U.S. Digital Service to help them with their technology as well.
Mr. Chairman, my time has expired. I'd like to submit for the record a question dealing with the gig economy and gig economy workers and how they've been dealing with this. Thank you.
Okay, your questions will be received now. Senator Menendez by TV or whatever you, virtual or whatever you call it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I share some of the concerns that the ranking member raised, Senator Wyden. I think it's fair to say that if you have an amendment that strips the $600 and every Republican votes for it, that was your intention. You didn't want the $600 to be part of the unemployment compensation. But what I'm concerned about is that it seems to me that these rosy expectations that everybody will be able to go back to work are just not going to be realized by August 1st. I live in a state that is has the second largest number of COVID-19 deaths and infections. It is going through a staged reopening. That means that many businesses still won't be open by then, or they will be opened with less capacity by then, which means that they will require less workers by then. And so if that's a reality, and we've seen where there has been a premature opening in states, that in fact, we ended up with higher COVID infection rates as a result of the premature opening. So when, we have a national unemployment rate of 13.3%, when unemployment rates among African Americans is even higher, 16.8%, when unemployment among Latinos is even higher than that, 17.6%, what is the administration's plan for August 1st?
Senator Menendez, thank you for the question. I think part of what we'd like to do is watch how things develop over the weeks ahead. One of the really striking things about the nation's experience with coronavirus has been how swiftly things change. And in the early weeks, unfortunately, that was a series of swift changes for the worse as the health problems increased greatly. And of course, as we very suddenly stopped our economy. All due respect,
Mr. Secretary, I'm looking at, we know there's going to be a cliff on August 1st. Why should we wait to address the cliff after August 1st than before? There's no question that unemployment is still going to be very high on August 1st, no matter how well we might desire, it to be different. And so for all those workers who either cannot get back to work because their phased reopening has not opened their former place of employment, or the phased reopening has only allowed, for argument's sake, 50% of the employees to come back, or there is still a risk, a reasonable risk, a serious risk of contraction of the infection, what are we going to do on August 1st?
Well, as I was saying, things have changed quickly for the worse for a period of time, but now we're seeing that things have the capacity to change quickly for the better. We know where the economy was in mid-May. We'll know more when our next jobs report comes out in early July about the state of the economy. I think based partly on that, we can make an assessment of what measures, if any, could be necessary after July 31st. I recognize that, as you say, we will not get back to the extraordinary economy that President Trump brought us of 3.5% unemployment. We won't get back there in early fall, but we will know a lot more as we come into July. And I think at that time we can take an assessment of the appropriate measures.
Let me reclaim my time, Mr. Secretary. I'm not going to let you filibuster my time. We are in the phases of reopening. How many coronavirus-related complaints has OSHA received? My understanding it's 5,000. Is that correct?
We have received several thousand. I don't have the exact
how
current
many
number.
Coronavirus citations?
I'm sorry, Senator. I'm just trying to complete my answers.
How many coronavirus citations have been issued by OSHA?
We've issued one citation to date. I would add that we have a 6-month limitations period. Of course, it's been less than 6 months since the virus came here. So we have a number of cases that we are investigating. And if we find violations, we will certainly not hesitate to bring a case. This is something that I've talked to our head of OSHA about a number of times.
It seems that instead of guidance, you should be issuing emergency temporary standards that are very clear under OSHA, and that would make a clear example of what is acceptable to return to work safely and what is not acceptable, and those who are forced to return to work in a situation that is unacceptable will have a valid claim. But one citation out of 5,000 is unbelievable.
Senator Toomey by TV.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thanks for joining us today. I just want to be clear about something. According to the University of Chicago, about 68% of people who are unemployed today make more money being unemployed than they do being employed. Is it your view that that's a disincentive to going back to work?
Thank you for the question, Senator Toomey, and I unfortunately wasn't able to complete my answer to that point to Senator Menendez. That can function as a disincentive. Again, that's recognized people who follow unemployment insurance programs. I would point particularly to the study that the chairman received from the Congressional Budget Office that looked at this question, and which projected that for the second half of the year, if the $600 benefit were retained, 5 out of 6 people on unemployment would be receiving more than the wage they were likely to get from work. And I don't think many people would design an unemployment system that operated in that way, and that's why this discussion makes sense now.
And we've had unemployment before. There's always some level of unemployment. We have never said, let's make sure that people are paid more not to work than they get paid working. We hear everyone talking about how they want to get everyone back to work, but at the same time, some people are advocating a system that we know discourages people from going back to work. And isn't it also true that if people affected by this disincentive don't go to work, then it's not only they who are not back at work, but the mere fact that they're not at work means other people are unable to go back to work just because the economy is that much slower. There's less business being conducted. So doesn't it have a knock-on effect throughout the economy?
That's correct, Senator. We want people who are not able to get to work to have the safety net of an unemployment program. But you're right, if people have the opportunity to return and don't, it can function as a hindrance not just to them, but to the functioning of what's a very, very interconnected economy.
So let's if we could focus on some great news, because there's a lot of great news, actually. One is the fact that we've had quite a number of states that have been quite open for business, some for many weeks now. This is not the case that the entire country is closed down. It's, in fact, there's a long list of states that began their reopening in April and early May. And isn't it true that there is no big spike of COVID cases in the states that have gone a long way towards reopening? In fact, the data shows that the decline in the new cases in COVID-19 has continued overwhelmingly in these states. Is that your understanding?
The reopening seems to be going well, Senator. It's very encouraging. There are spots we need to keep an eye on, and we need to be safe about how we go about it. But it's been very encouraging.
The other thing that's been very, very encouraging is the fact that back in mid-April, we had a week where we produced 2.5 million new jobs when we thought we might be shedding 6, 7, 8, 9 million jobs. It was the exact opposite. And isn't it true that that mid-April number, look, I don't have a crystal ball, but I do know that many states moved in the direction of reopening since that time. And so it stands to reason, if our economy was producing 2.5 million new jobs in a week back in mid-April, that it's been probably producing new jobs since then. And when I say new, obviously we're really talking about people getting back to their old jobs. But isn't there good reason at least to be hopeful that we're starting to really climb out of this and starting to create the opportunities for people to go back to earning their livelihoods?
Absolutely, Senator. One of the numbers that has caught my attention in both the report for the month of April and the report for the month of May is the very high percent of workers who are unemployed but believe it's temporary. In our report for the month of May, nearly 85% of workers who'd been put out of work said, this is temporary, I'm going back to my job. And I regard it as one of our most important missions right now at the Labor Department to help make that happen and help make it happen safely.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, now I call on Senator Cardin by TV, I believe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Secretary, thank you very much. First, let me share the concerns that have been expressed in regards to worker safety. To me, that's one of the most important roles that you have, is to make sure that workers are safe. Secondly, let me underscore what I believe is our need to act, that the job is not done. Whether it's unemployment insurance, or whether it's the PPP program and small business aid, or whether it's the tax code itself, we know that we're going to need a transition from where we are now to when our economy is fully performing. So I just urge us to show a sense of urgency. Thirdly, I want to just underscore the point that Senator Stabenow said in regards to the short-time compensation rules. That gives an employer an opportunity to share work so that he can keep or she can keep her workforce intact during these tough times. So, Mr. Secretary, I would hope that you would get some personal attention as to how we can implement this provision, because I do think it helps us transition back to when our economy is in full performance. I want to get your response to a question I had from the governor of Maryland in regards to implementing this program. Maryland, like most states, had IT challenges because of trying to put the state program in with the federal program. But it was the Interstate Connection Network, ICON, that did present some original challenges. And I believe you've indicated that there were startup challenges in regards to ICON. But in addition, there's been changes in guidance given by the federal government, which has required our states to change their IT programs. Can you share with us how you're working with the states and the current status of ICON and the IT capacity of our states in order to get timely decision-making? We still have in Maryland a lot of people who are waiting for determinations. What is the current status of that?
First, I agree with you that our job is not done in helping workers during this challenging time and in fully restoring our economy. And I agree as well on the importance of worker safety. I think there's a difference as to means, perhaps, but it is something that's been of great focus at the Department of Labor. And by the way, I have personally engaged in the work share subject and looking at ways that we can encourage states to do that and have assisted in that. With respect to the ICON system, which you mentioned, yes, there was a problem that came to our attention. We fixed it within days. I've had a couple conversations with Governor Hogan, who, as you know, is also chair of the National Governors Association. He's never expressed any concern to me about changes to the guidance that we've provided. I'm not aware of any changes that he might be referring to. We have put out a great deal of guidance. I suppose some of that guidance made certain points clearer than they might have been before. But I think we've largely been unswerving and clear in the guidance as we've given it, although we've provided refinements as they've been requested. And then finally, with respect to the technology, I appreciate that that's been a challenge for the states. As you heard Ranking Member Wyden say, that was something I cautioned the members of this committee about when CARES was written, that the state unemployment insurance computer systems are really old. They are bulky. But we have tried to help by making our Chief Information Officer available, by making the U.S. Digital Service within the Executive Office of the President available to states. And we do believe that states have found fixes, have found workarounds. We've worked, for example, with Florida on one, which related to a problem they were having with ICON. And we also worked with New Jersey on one that related to ways that certain forms were being submitted through their system. So I think those systems have been problematic, but I think they've been enhanced in the last few weeks.
Can I follow up on the certification requirements? Have you had concerns expressed by states that the weekly certification to make sure that the recipient is not getting benefits in more than one state has caused undue challenges to the states in implementing the program?
Senator, we have had some states that have expressed interest in doing away with the certification requirements, and we understand the desire that they've had to get payments out quickly, but there is a balance to be struck with respect to the integrity of these programs, and we've felt it's important to retain that certification requirement as one check against the fraud, against the system that we know has occurred. There has been very substantial fraud, we've learned, against the unemployment insurance systems of the states during implementation of CARES, and so we do need to keep that in mind as well. Senator Cassidy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, again, thanks for the hard work you and your department have done. One of the advantages, if you will, of speaking after many other people, you noted concern. Republicans have been concerned that $600 a week in which people are earning more than they are paid would encourage them not to work, and that has negative effects for the person, negative effects for society. That's known. But it's been roughly a kind of Republican-Democrat, with Democrats apparently poo-pooing that. Just to see if there could be an objective analysis aside from the report from GAO, or CBO, I'm sorry. I found a quote from Professor Larry Summers, who was Obama's, I think, director of something or other. Everybody knows who Professor Summers is. Government assistance programs contribute to long-term unemployment by providing an incentive and the means not to work. Each unemployed person, and note this term, has a reservation wage, the minimum wage which he or she insists on getting before accepting a job. Unemployment insurance and other social assistance programs increase that reservation wage, causing an unemployed person to remain unemployed later. Again, Larry Summers, who's esteemed and from Harvard and with Obama, et cetera. Now, let me ask you, sir, what would be if the $600 a week pandemic unemployment benefit is extended through the end of the year? What do you estimate the reservation wage is that a business must offer to someone on unemployment to convince them that they should return to work? And is this a wage most businesses will be able to match or even bear if they're a small business?
Thank you for the question on this topic, which obviously is of great interest to members of the committee. Senator, if I could, I'd like to be clear again that the $600 benefit that was provided in the CARES Act was one of the really very important good things done in that act. It was the right thing to do at that time in a closing economy. And I am mindful of the concerns, and I heard members of this committee express them at the time, that that might result in some people turning down work. We've made a priority to the department, working with the states, to focus on the existing protections in the law to make sure that doesn't happen. However, much of the discussion that I think we're having now is looking ahead, as your question does, not to what we put in place, but what, if anything, will be done when the $600 benefit expires on the deadline that the Congress agreed to set of late July. I have not read Professor Summers' piece. Obviously, he's a highly respected economist.
It's an older piece. I don't think he's saying it right now.
Maybe he's recanted. But you're correct. At the margins, again, for some number of employees, and I'm not talking about the millions of hardworking Americans who would rather be at work, but for some number of employees, you'll have to set that wage higher.
And do you have a sense of what that would be?
I don't have a sense of what it would be, but it would be probably appreciably above 100% of what the work.
I don't think anybody's criticizing anybody for making a rational individual decision. If I make more money not working, I'm not going to work. That's a rational decision. It's just we know that working actually statistically is good for people. So I don't think, I'm not asking you to do that. Now, some folks have said, wait a second, since we can't continue this forever, is there a way to gradually scale it down so that, yes, we provide support, but we encourage people to return back to the workforce, good for the family, good for the individual, good for society. But I'm struck what you've said about the inadequacy of state information systems. Are state unemployment systems capable of a system that would gradually scale down the amount of benefits received from month to month?
I believe that the states have made progress in their systems from where we were in March. And I was explaining to Ranking Member Wyden, this is something that I would be interested in exploring further with the committee. I think there may be a greater capacity now than there was in March for the systems to scale, or for the Treasury Department, for example, to assist in that. That was an approach that we had raised at the time that CARES was being considered, that there might be a way for the Treasury Department to function as part of the distribution system. There also, as you know, Senator, has been discussion of perhaps having a smaller benefit, not $600, but perhaps $250. I've heard that.
But the question is, could you scale it down? Let me move on to my last question. I'm almost out of time. There's been a lot of layoffs. The job numbers actually were great, but on the public sector, we continue to have people laid off, and as it turns out, many of those are in the education system. Now, when you go back, it's going to be clear there'll be smaller classrooms with more assistants in order to help the children maintain social distancing, et cetera. Senator Menendez and I have put together a SMART Act, which would help these state and local governments rehire these employees. But do you know how many of these 1 million or so state and local employees in education who've lost their job are on temporary furlough, or they expect to be rehired, or they've been let go entirely? Do you have any sense of that?
I don't have those figures. I could get them for you. Government jobs were the really were the one category of jobs with very substantial losses in May. I think it was about 600,000 jobs, actually, and many of those jobs were in K-12 education and in college. So I could try to get more detailed data, but I know that many of the jobs lost in May were in that sector, but I'm also confident that those are probably all jobs that will come back as schools reopen.
I yield back. Thank you.
Senator Brown by TV.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're all learning the technology here. Thank you so much. Secretary, thank you for being here. Ranking Member Wyden and I, along with 22 of our colleagues, sent you a letter dated May 14th outlining concerns about UI benefits being delayed. In so many of our states, that's $600. And I would point out, in spite of my all my Republican colleagues on this committee talking about how they like that benefit now. They all but one voted the only amendment that Senator McConnell allowed on the floor to the entire CARES Act was to wipe away the unemployment benefit on that $600. So they can take credit for doing it, but now they're against it, and just something to remember who's on the side of workers. But anyway, we outlined, we saw too many states, too many people were not getting the benefits. They were delayed. Our letter asks you to undertake a critical survey of state unemployment programs so we can fix the problems that cause the delays and make sure they don't happen again. Would you, Mr. Secretary, commit to conducting that survey that 24 members of the Senate asked, providing policy recommendations and responding in a timely fashion?
Senator Brown, thank you for that letter. I believe it gave us a mid-July return date. It asked for certain information within 60 days. Because I don't have the letter in front of me, I'm hesitant to commit that we will provide every piece of detailed information that was sought, but we certainly will respond to that letter. And I understand the concerns that you have.
I think that you and I share, and all of us share, an interest in making sure that we can fix this on this UI system, which has had a workout that nobody expected to have, but also a UI system that has gotten pretty outmoded and outdated over the years. So thank you for that. Second question, the national unemployment rate is over 13%. The unemployment rate for Latinx workers is almost 18 and almost 17 for black workers. If we phase out the unemployment insurance program and the CARES Act, including the $600 weekly benefit, which ends in July, do you expect black and brown workers to be disproportionately affected by that policy decision? Yes or no?
Senator Brown, I do agree with you on the state unemployment insurance systems. As I said, I think there have been significant progress made, but as we look back at lessons learned and things that we might want to fix going forward, I do think that's an area that is worth further consideration, how they can be enhanced. In terms of the job prospects for African Americans, Hispanic Americans going forward, that will depend in part on different parts of the country's reopening schedule, different sectors of the economy. What we do know is the economy that we had before, which President Trump was instrumental in building.
Mr. Secretary, I'm going to interrupt you. I've heard your commercial. Mr. Chairman, I want the floor back.
Unemployment for African Americans and Hispanic Americans.
I've heard that. We've heard, Mr. Chairman, we've heard the Trump
That
commercial.
is the objective once again.
Mr. Chairman, would you gavel the witness, please? We've heard the Trump commercial over and over how great the economy was, even though 40% of Americans didn't have $400 in their pockets, even in the great growth of the Trump economy, which was not nearly as good as the Secretary likes to keep saying. It's clear that brown and black workers will be disproportionately affected. I mean, that was a simple yes or no, and I got a commercial for the president's reelection. Next question, Mr. Chairman. Some have argued that the $600 is going to keep workers from going back to work. It's a pretty clear takeaway here. The companies they work for didn't pay them enough to begin with. So, Mr. Secretary, if we raise the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour, would you expect the number of workers who receive more in UI than they did in their paychecks to decrease? That's a pretty easy yes or no. If we raise to $15, will that make more workers make more on the job than they're getting in UI?
Not necessarily. The UI payment right now with the $600 plus up averages between $50,000 and $55,000 a year on unemployment insurance. That's substantially more.
Except, Mr. Secretary, they don't work.
In fact, if I could finish. In fact, the $600 plus up alone is substantially more than the minimum wage on an annualized basis, but you have in addition to that the state payment. So unfortunately, I don't think that's a helpful comparison.
I can see, Mr. Secretary, I can see what a good lawyer you were as a corporate lawyer. But the fact is, it doesn't go. It's not 55. It's 39 weeks is the maximum, but let's put that aside. I wanted to say how much
I was annualizing the benefit.
Senator Menendez, how outrageous it was that he pointed out that 5,000 complaints from workers terrified they're going to get coronavirus on the job and then have to go home and potentially expose their families, and you've only done one citation. I would like to ask you to submit to this committee in my office the list of all on-site in-person inspections as a result of a complaint received by federal OSHA. I would like you to submit a running total as you do these inspections. I mean, we know what the president said when we saw what happened in Sioux Falls with hundreds of people being diagnosed with coronavirus at the slaughterhouse, and the president, using the Defense Production Act, ordered them back to work. Nothing about worker safety, nothing about slowing down the line, nothing about food safety. And that, I think, tells the story. I'll just close with this, Mr. Chairman. We're in the midst of a pandemic. We have a president and administration that call workers essential but treat them like they're expendable. The president said last week the unemployment numbers are, quote, stupendous. In reality, they're the worst since World War II. In Ohio, they're opening up eviction courts actually in arenas, if you can imagine that. We've learned from the DOL in this hearing has issued one citation showing how much they really care about workers. The Attorney General over the weekend said there isn't any institutional racism in policing. I don't know how he figures that. We shouldn't be cutting off the safety net. Workers need to pay their bills. We can't allow this administration to continue its 4-year-long betrayal of workers.
Senator Bennett.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, but if I could respond to that.
You may respond to it. Before you respond to it, well, no, go ahead and respond to it. And then,
as I said, we have
Senator Bennett.
We are investigating every single complaint that we receive from workers about unsafe conditions pertaining to COVID. We have a 6-month limitations period, and when we find violations, we will indeed bring citations if we find them. We have the tools needed to do that. We also have, as I said, a 6-month limitations period. So we will do that work. That said, I think it's a real disservice for people to suggest that OSHA is not taking this seriously. Employers need to know that indeed we are, and they do need to protect their workers. And we want workers to know that if they have complaints, please do bring them to us. If they think that they've been subject to retaliation for raising health concerns, please do bring them to us. So I want to correct any impression that people listening might have that OSHA is not indeed taking these matters very seriously.
Anybody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I heard Senator Brown say that the president used the Defense Production Act to order the workers back to work. He ordered the companies to get the company up and running. The only way you're going to get workers to go back to work if they realize that they aren't going to go into a death chamber when they go back to work. And that was the company's
or Mr. Chairman.
That was the company.
Or Mr. Chairman, if they think they're going to lose their job if they don't return back to work. I mean, you can't. Workers are going to go back if they think they'll lose their job and won't get their unemployment benefits.
Well, he didn't correct me, but go ahead, Senator Pat.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary Scalia, for being here. We appreciate it, and I'm grateful for the response to Senator Brown's question. I think it's critically important because if people don't think they're going to be safe, if they don't think health is going to be enforced at work, they're not going to go back to work. And what I heard you say, Secretary Scalia, is that you want OSHA on the job. You want people to know that that they can file complaints if they've been mistreated at work in this context, and that you'll report to the committee the work that OSHA is going to do, has not yet done, is going to do. I think that's very important to all of us, and we want to know it. And we want to know what the facts really are, because it's the only way people are going to go back to work. I think it's just clear that we are facing an unprecedented healthcare challenge in this pandemic, and that has created an unprecedented economic crisis in our country. 1 in 6 workers in this country are unemployed. By the way, I also would say about the Trump economy and all this stuff, the reality is the average monthly job creation under Donald Trump is lower than it was under President Obama for the first 3 years of the Trump administration. So rewriting that history here, I don't think is all that helpful. But in this moment, Mr. Chairman, to the ranking member, I'd say thanks to this committee, we've helped workers in two major ways. First, we expanded unemployment benefits to cover almost 10 million self-employed workers, gig workers, and others who are usually left behind, and I hope won't be left behind in the future. Second, we added $600 per week, as we've been debating here together, to the normal unemployment benefit for all 30 million workers claiming benefits. And had we not done this, without this, tens of millions of families across the country from Iowa to Oregon through Colorado would have seen their incomes drop by 60%, 70% or more. And we prevented that from happening. And I know we're hearing criticisms today about the benefits. I just want to be very clear about what it's done until now. The $600 weekly benefit has prevented a level of severe hardship that it's almost impossible to comprehend, even in this hearing room. It paid the rent and prevented evictions. It's kept food on the table so families don't go hungry. It's kept the lights on and paid for internet so kids can have access to learn. And it's been an essential lifeline to families in the middle of the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. Even President Trump seems to recognize this because he's running campaign ads touting these benefits. But even as he's running the ads, he's also threatening to take them away. And I think that would be a profound mistake. Right now, 17% of American families can't cover 3 months of basic expenses. Without the extra benefits, that number would rise to 43%. Today, nearly 10% of Americans can't make rent. Without the extra benefits, that could rise to 30%. Think of what that would do to our economy. So if we let these benefits expire at the end of July, Mr. Secretary, I'd argue that we're going to throw tens of millions of people who rely on them into a financial crisis, family by family, all across the United States of America. Mr. Secretary, you called expanded unemployment benefits a, quote, important short-term measure adopted in these extraordinary times to alleviate the economic impact of the virus on working Americans. I think you'll agree probably with me, Mr. Chairman, that we're not going to create 20 million more jobs in the next 2 months. Do you think we are?
Senator, I wouldn't predict 20 million jobs in the next 2 months. What I do predict, and what we've already observed, is a very different economy than existed when CARES was enacted. And remember, this body itself set a July 31st expiration for that benefit.
Right.
I think where we sit now is the recovery in the job market has actually happened more quickly than Congress expected in late March.
Well, let's hope that's right, but I think that it's probably safe to say at least 10 million people will be unemployed at the end of July with no jobs to return to. I mean, does that feel to you like an extraordinary circumstance along the lines you described the importance of the unemployment benefit in the last downturn?
I think that 10 million unemployed Americans is 10 million more Americans without a job than we want. And that does make sense for us to consider, particularly as we get closer to that July 31st date, what measures may be necessary. But if I could just underscore again, the size of the benefit, as valuable as it's been, as important as it's been, it is great. In Massachusetts, you are able, with this $600 plus up, to obtain $75,000 a year. That's the annualized income that you get on unemployment in Massachusetts right now. In the state of Oregon, it's annualizes at potentially $65,000 a year. Senator Brown asked me about the $15 minimum wage, and as I said, the $600 weekly benefit by itself is actually just slightly more than that 15-hour minimum wage. But on top of that, you get the state unemployment benefit. So it has been a very important system, but as we look long-term, I think there are few people that would suggest that you should have an unemployment system long-term that pays $75,000.
I got my last minute taken away from me, Mr. Chairman, so if I could just take 30 seconds to finish my point.
I'll give you 30 seconds.
That's all I'll take. In answer to Senator Cassidy's question, Mr. Secretary, you said you thought the state State departments were now up to the challenge of maybe dealing with a benefit that ratcheted down over time. I believe that it was a mistake for us to tie it to a date certain. I don't think that makes sense. I think what we should do is tie it to the economic conditions that the country is facing and that our workers are facing, so that when the economy, when the unemployment's going up, the benefit is going down. When we're doing worse, the opposite would be true. And I hope you'll work with the committee to design something rational like that, because having it just end on a date certain is going to be very cold comfort to millions of people in this country. Thank you,
Senator. I'd welcome the opportunity to continue that conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Before I call on Senator Casey's next. I want to remind people that during the debate on the CARES Act, Senator Sass and others put forward an amendment to the bill not to block the extra $600 payments, but instead to tell states they'd have to make sure that they didn't pay people more for not working than working. States said it would have taken them months to implement. So clearly states were hit with an overwhelming shock that was difficult for their systems to deal with, but no one proposed to block these extra payments entirely.
Mr. Chairman, just if I could, the states were incapable at that time of doing what Sass was talking about, which is why, and you were in the negotiations, we had to go with a rough justice approach. And it is why we have tried to extricate from the Secretary this afternoon an answer to the question about whether the states would be capable of doing 100% wage replacement now accurately, and he has not indicated that was the case. So I just want to, and I know we're going to be debating this, I just wanted to set the record straight.
Okay, now we go to Senator Casey by TV.
Mr. Chairman, thanks very much for this hearing, and I want to thank Secretary Scalia for his presence at the hearing. Mr. Secretary, I'll have a question for you regarding workplaces and COVID-19, but let me start with some of the data which we cannot escape and we have to continue to bear in mind as we approach these challenges. When I consider just my home state of Pennsylvania, here's some of the data. The case number now is more than 76,400 COVID-19 cases. The death number has gone above 6,000. As of today, the last number was 6,014 people dead from COVID-19. In addition to that, the unemployment are extraordinary. More than 15% of our, the 15% unemployment rate in Pennsylvania, 15.1. What that equates to is 976,000 people unemployed. We never saw those numbers, as bad as the Great Recession was, never saw those numbers at that time. Now, I know with regard to both COVID-19 and the economic devastation that flows in its wake, that we've passed, I guess it's technically 5 bills now, 2 by consent and three that we had a vote on. Those 5 bills were helping in a lot of ways, but more action is needed by the Congress. Unemployment benefits had a very positive impact on people's lives. The $600 per week additional payment, by one estimate, replaced 30% of total private sector wages and salaries lost just in the month of April. So a huge impact on people's lives. Benefits, as you know, are about to end at the end of July 31st. So the benefits end, but the costs don't end. The cost for mortgage, the cost for food, the cost for rent, so many other costs in the life of a family do not end on July 31st. And I think it's about time we started to say that more and bear that in mind as we hear senators talking about ending this program in an arbitrary fashion with no approach, no strategy to replace it or to mitigate the damage. And more broadly, many in the Senate majority want to stop legislating altogether on COVID-19 and on jobs. Now, some have said they want to help state and local governments. There's some bipartisan action on a few issues. But in terms of the substantial help that our states still need and our communities and our families need, it seems like the Senate majority wants to walk away from that responsibility. I don't think that's what the American people want, and especially they don't want us to spend another month voting on nominations instead of COVID-19 and the jobs crisis. I think we can do better than that. Now, just back to the unemployment rate, we know that as much as the unemployment rate is high across the nation at more than 13%, it's especially high for African Americans, almost 17% for African Americans, and at last count for Hispanics, 17.6, which just happens to be the same unemployment rate that's in my home county, Lackawanna County, Pennsylvania. So there's a lot of pain out there. So as we talk in this academic fashion about ending a program, we should acknowledge and be responsive to the devastation out there. We should not cut off unemployment insurance with no effort to mitigate the damage, the economic devastation so many families are facing. So we ought to be talking about providing pandemic premium pay for frontline workers who risk their lives. All of that should be part of our debate. Now, I want to ask the Secretary a question about a letter we sent him in May. Mr. Secretary, we sent you a letter to clarify whether workers who have been offered their jobs back would lose unemployment insurance if they refuse to work in a circumstance where the workplace they would return to is in fact unsafe. Will the Department of Labor issue guidance to states to clarify that workers cannot lose unemployment insurance if the workplace is not safe in following CDC or OSHA requirements?
Senator Casey, it's good to have the chance to speak to you again. There was a lot in that question. Just a couple quick comments, and I'll answer your question. I agree with you. It's very important that we remain mindful of the impact that the coronavirus has had on workers and on unemployment. That's a focus of the staff at the Labor Department every minute of every working day, and those have been long days too. And I do think it's important to remember that as much as we want our unemployment system to function as effectively as possible, even better is a job. And so our long-term goal really does need to be getting our economy back to where it was. It was so vibrant through the first week of March. And there was actually a piece in the Wall Street Journal just came out today speaking of how the economy under the president, which was affected by coronavirus, was, quote, the best African-American job market on record, is how the Journal described it, and that's what the numbers show. So we want to get back there. In terms of your question, Senator, the precise circumstances in which a worker can decline to go to work because he or she believes the workplace is unsafe is something that the states determine according to their law. The requirement is that it be suitable work. Suitable work has to be safe. And so the states are to judge that. There are certain broad parameters, but I think if a worker has facts telling him or her that the workplace is unsafe because there are unmitigated COVID exposures, we would think that the worker should not have to go back until that workplace is, in fact, made safe.
Senator Warner.
You are the Secretary of the Department of Labor of the United States of America. One of the programs created under the CARES Act for unemployment insurance, so-called PUA, the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance, that is a federal program. And you have responsibilities beyond that when you oversee unemployment insurance more broadly across the nation. Don't you feel that, or don't you believe that you have a responsibility to give guidance on something as fundamental as the safety of a workplace in the middle of a pandemic? I just think that has to be an obligation you have. I don't understand why you think you can just pass that off to the states.
We have given it. I've given it, and it is a federal-state partnership.
Okay, Senator Warner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Secretary, thank you for appearing here today. I know there's been a lot of discussion about the bump up on the unemployment assistance during the pandemic. But I think one area that I hope there is bipartisan consensus, and I appreciate the chairman and Senator Wyden's good work on this, and that was trying to make sure during the pandemic that we covered all workers. I think we all now realize how many workers traditionally were not covered by unemployment. In my state, in Virginia, 683,000 workers that were freelancers, 1099ers, independent contractors, gig workers had not been covered. Matter of fact, as a nationwide basis, about 20 million workers were not covered by traditional UI. And I do hope one area that we could agree that we need to make sure is that kind of the economy is not changing. We're not going away from freelancers, gig workers, 1099ers. How do we make sure they get some of these benefits? And thank goodness, under the leadership of this committee, we did that, because while about 18.5 million Americans qualified for traditional unemployment, over 10 million Americans qualified for the PUA, the expansion, and I think that lifeline has made a difference from, frankly, economic ruin. And again, I hope, Mr. Secretary, that you would believe that that type of the program needs to be continued. One thing, Mr. Secretary, I want to drill down on is something we've been trying to get an answer from. If we all agree that the intent of Congress with this expansion was, under PUA, was to cover all workers during this unprecedented time, I want to make sure that you would confirm something we've still had some lack of clarity on, and that is that freelancers, including those who work from home, who have lost work, or domestic workers who obviously work in the home but who have lost work, that both of those categories are covered by the PUA.
Senator Warner, thank you for your attention to this set of issues, which I know is very important to you, both in the context of the current crisis and unemployment and more broadly. I do agree that one of the really terrific things that was done in the CARES Act, we're hearing a lot of disagreements today, but the CARES Act was the product and reflection of a whole lot of really great agreement. And one of those great agreements was covering gig workers. There are other programs, something called DUA, Disaster Unemployment Assistance, that can also provide coverage, but we've never done anything on a scale such as that, and I think it was a very good thing to do in the CARES Act. With respect to your questions, I always need to be careful in addressing specific hypotheticals about particular jobs, but I do believe that the freelancer is something that we have addressed. I know there's been concern about that. If somebody was making a living for example, as a freelance journalist and was for some reason just unable to continue that for one of the qualifying reasons that Congress put forth in the CARES Act, then I would expect that person to be covered by this, what we're calling this PUA benefit for the self-employed, if they're not covered by the ordinary state system, and they're probably not. That
journalist could have been somebody who was working at home, so they were a freelancer working at home. Thank you for that clarification. And if you could address the domestic worker.
With the caveat, I think that's correct, Senator.
If you could address the domestic worker, and fairly briefly, because I've got one other point I'd like to make.
Same answer, Senator. With the caveat, I think that would probably be the case if one of those qualifying conditions was met, although, domestic workers may actually be covered employees under state law. But I think there's likely to be coverage one way or the other.
Well, I know I've been working with the group, the Domestic Workers Alliance, and I think they'll be happy to hear your comments and look forward to trying to work to make sure that this area, at least, where we ought to make sure these 20 million Americans nationally, these 10 million who've already qualified in this pandemic, this expansion of this coverage ought to be maintained. And I'll just take my last 28 seconds and I know I've tried to make the case to you, Mr. Secretary, but make the case to my colleagues on both sides of the aisle. I think we need more experimentation with these portable benefits to attach to individuals that move with them from gig to gig. There were 5 members on this committee that embraced experimentation on portable benefits, that we would try a variety of models. And I particularly say to my Democratic colleagues, there's a number of models that come out of Europe, Sweden, Belgium, Denmark, the Ghent model, where these portable benefit systems are actually administered by labor unions and have become the methodology for them to move into the 21st century. This is one area where there's bipartisan agreement. I hope, Mr. Chairman, we can continue to work on it in the next bill, and that we go ahead and expand experimentation around portable benefits, because I think this is we're looking at the workforce of the future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hassan by TV.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member Wyden. Thank you, Secretary Scalia, for being here today. As Congress responds to the impacts of COVID-19, one of the main issues that I hear about from New Hampshire constituents is delays in receiving unemployment benefits. New Hampshire is one of several states still working to fully implement the expanded unemployment benefits under the CARES Act. As issues arise, I hope that the Department of Labor will continue to support the state and help ensure that New Hampshire workers quickly receive the support that they need. My first question, Secretary, is about the unemployment benefits we've been discussing. As our country has responded to COVID-19, expanded unemployment insurance has helped to ensure that workers have the financial support that they need when measures such as stay-at-home orders are in place. As Senator Casey mentioned, unemployment benefits also support workers who themselves are sick or at an increased risk of the virus, helping them afford to stay out of the workplace to protect themselves and others. So, Secretary Scalia, yes or no, do you agree that during this unprecedented time, unemployment insurance has been an important tool to support public health strategies to contain the spread of COVID-19?
I do agree with that, Senator Hassan, and in fact, in the first half of March, we issued a guidance document even before paid leave was made available for employees of small employers. In FCRA, we issued a guidance document demonstrating to the states how the unemployment insurance system could be available to assist workers who had COVID or were caring for somebody who did. So I do agree with that. And just one last point in the first part of your question.
Because I have several questions.
I understand. We understand the difficulties that states have had processing benefits. We genuinely are here to help. We have been in touch with all of the states, but if we can do more, please have the folks in your state system let us know, and we'll do all we can.
Well, thank you. And I just wanted to follow up on your answer about the unemployment benefit being a public health tool, because despite what we think the economy may or may not look like in July, we do know that this pandemic will still be with us. And we do know that that will prevent critical challenges for our workforce as they try to balance this new world. Senator Stabenow talked about the capacity for employers to use unemployment benefits to supplement part-time work, which may in fact be very important for families where childcare is still not available at the beginning, or school may not be available, especially if we don't provide more state and local aid as they face budget crunches. So I just want us all to keep that in mind. I wanted to ask you too, Secretary, about the issue of expanded paid leave for many workers, and you just referenced it a bit ago. In addition to expanded unemployment insurance, Congress also enacted emergency expanded paid leave for many workers. This leave includes 2 weeks of paid sick leave and up to 10 weeks of additional paid leave for parents whose children's schools have closed. Access to paid sick leave is an important public health tool to encourage workers to stay home if they are sick without losing their paychecks or possibly their jobs. The Department of Labor is tasked with ensuring that workers are aware of their rights to paid leave, but data has indicated that many workers who are eligible for this leave are unaware of this new program. Secretary Scalia, what additional actions will the Department of Labor take to improve its outreach and education to workers regarding their access to emergency paid leave benefits?
Senator, I will take a look at what guidance we have on that currently. I will tell you that when FCRA was enacted, we engaged in a very intense campaign to provide guidance, answer questions for workers and employers so that they were familiar with the program. We put out a series of 5 or maybe even 6 frequently asked questions to provide guidance. We featured it prominently on the website of our wage hour division, and we also very swiftly put in place rules to implement that benefit. I will note that
Secretary, my time is almost up.
We've recovered nearly $650,000 for workers and brought benefits to approximately 500 workers in our implementation of that program.
Okay,
Mr. Secretary and Mr. Chair, I'm going to ask for your indulgence for just a moment. Please.
You state your question and he can answer it, and then we'll go on to the next one. We still got 10 people here, so that's at least.
I will just 50. Say, my question is this, and it's one I will follow up with the Secretary after the hearing, but I just want to put the question on the record. One is that we still need to have the Department of Labor do more because people are not aware of their paid sick leave rights under the legislation. And I would like to follow up with the Secretary about the issue of workforce training, because since 2001, state formula grant funding levels under the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act have fallen by 40% as adjusted for inflation. So we're going to need to think about how our workforce systems can help get workers who have been dislocated by COVID-19 back to work, and what kind of additional federal resources will be necessary to support these workforce training and reemployment activities. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Senator Enzi.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, just to respond quickly. Again, we put out a very extensive set of documents to explain to the American people how that program will work. I'd certainly be happy to look at it again. And with respect to help to dislocated workers, in addition to all the things I've mentioned earlier, we actually have made dislocated worker grants to 40 states in an amount of approximately $225 million.
Senator Enzi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for doing this hearing. And I want to thank Secretary Scalia for being willing to answer questions. I appreciate all the comments that there have been about the $600 per week being flat fee and why, and all the discussion on that. Senator Grassley, you started off with a couple of letters that you had received, and one was from an employer, one was from an employer, but they're both about the employees. There are also some employers out there in small business who are making less than their former employees who are on unemployment. I'm appreciative of what the effort that Senator Portman is making to make some changes in that, and appreciate all the answers that you've given on that. I'll maybe submit a couple of questions, but I'll change the subject to something we haven't talked about yet. It's concerning to me that my state of Wyoming was a target for foreign fraud. How are you advising states to prevent fraud and abuse by foreign entities? Is there a department plan to recover any of the fraudulent payments? Does Congress need to help with these efforts?
Thank you, Senator Enzi. Fraud on the unemployment system has always been a problem. I'm pleased to say that in 2019, for the first time since it had been monitored, we got our improper payments rate, as it's called, below the 10% target. So we were on a good trajectory, but the coronavirus obviously has upended so many different things, and that included the risk of fraud in the system. There has been fraud. As you say, Senator, there's been highly sophisticated criminal enterprises that have engaged in fraud in the system. We are working with our Inspector General. We've been working with other federal agencies. We've been working with the states. There's something called the UI Integrity Center that the states are working with. That center sponsors something called a data hub for state information sharing. So there are many different mechanisms in place, and Congress did make $26 million available to our Inspector General in the CARES Act to address this problem. We will continue to work on it hard. We know it's real. We know it's, in some cases, interfering with the delivery of benefits to people who are entitled to them, so we will stay on it.
Thank you for the wide range of things that you have to cover, as has been pointed out in this hearing. Thanks for the great job you do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Carver.
Yeah, I'd like to say, Mr. Secretary, welcome. I want to stay on the point Senator Enzi just raised. I spoke last week with our own Secretary of Labor at the Department of Labor in Delaware, and the issue of fraud came up. He mentioned foreign involvement, and he talked about folks, a criminal element in Nigeria, I think is what he said, and that
that's correct.
The amount of money that's may have been stolen, literally, by these folks who are pretty smart. I was in the billions of dollars. And I would just ask just sort of a follow-up question with respect to what Mike Kinsey was just raising. But I think you've said this, but would you commit to provide GAO and, again, the agency inspector general and others with the information they need to conduct effective oversight of the response with respect to UI benefits?
We will certainly cooperate with any investigations that are being conducted as to that. We are, as I said, working closely with our Inspector General. I actually sent a joint memo to all Labor Department employees, joint with the Inspector General about a month or so, maybe 6 weeks ago, emphasizing the importance of integrity at the department generally. But the Inspector General, I also spoke particularly about the importance of integrity and guarding against fraud in connection with the CARES Act on employment insurance benefits. You're right. There's a Nigerian ring, evidently, among others. We received a letter from the Unemployment Insurance Commissioner in Washington State just the other day. They believe they've recovered hundreds of millions that had been misappropriated through this criminal enterprise, but there are still very significant challenges. We'll work with GAO and the IGP.
Yeah, please do. I urge you to work with GAO as well. Thank you very much. A quick question. The unemployment rate in our country is high, as you know, very high. The unemployment rate for folks who happen to be black or Hispanic is even higher. And any ideas on some specific steps that the administration is taking to address this particular issue, this particular challenge?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, until the coronavirus hit, we had hit all-time lows for unemployment for African Americans, for Hispanic Americans. There were also steps that the president took that were very important to him, including establishing opportunity zones in impoverished neighborhoods, the First Step Back, which was an important piece of criminal justice reform, but among other things made it easier for people who had been in the criminal justice system to come back into the workplace. Those will remain priorities. I know how proud the president was of the job opportunities that his economy was providing to
Mr. Secretary, I'm going to ask you
very important goal.
Mr. Secretary, I'm going to ask you to stop talking. All right? I have another question. Thank you.
Just answering your question.
Yes. Yeah, you more than answered my question. Thank you. The workforce retraining, this is a big issue. When I used to be, I'm a former governor, I do customer calls, used to do them every week. Visit customers, businesses large and small, and ask them, how are you doing, how are we doing, what can we do to help? And this was a time when we had maybe 150, 160 million people going to work on a given day. And we had 6 or 7 million jobs where nobody was showing up because the folks who were the jobs that were needed, the kind of skills were needed, were not inherent in the people who were looking for work. And then the situation's been exacerbated now. Others have asked you about this, but I've given a lot of thought to workforce training. Retraining could be, we have something in Delaware where we actually train kids right through high school for jobs that are in careers going to be out there. We have labor unions work with apprenticeship programs. We work with our Del Tech, or our technical communities and colleges, so forth. But there's got to be, all these businesses that are gone, they're gone. They're not coming back. The folks who work there don't have a job to come back to. They may have skills, but they don't have the skills that are needed for the jobs that are out there. And I think we need a thoughtful, comprehensive approach that involves not just the federal government, not just state governments, but community colleges and other nonprofits, to actually focus on how do we help these folks retool and retrain for the jobs that are going to be there in the months and years to come. Any thoughts there, please?
I agree with much and maybe everything you said. I think that Workforce training is important. We learned a great deal in the economy that we had. One of the things that I really appreciated in that economy was that businesses were reaching out more to train workers. Apprenticeships were thriving. Community colleges were playing a really important role. So we learned a lot that I think we can now apply going forward, because I do think that although we will bring back to work millions upon millions of workers who were put out of work by the virus, there will be others who don't go back to those jobs, and I think we will want to apply some of the lessons learned, and you described some of them. We'll want to apply some of those lessons learned going forward, and I'd be happy to talk to you about it further.
That'd be great. Thanks so much.
Okay, Mr. Portman. Senator Portman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And let me say, first of all, to my colleague and friend, Senator Carper, I couldn't agree with him more. We already had a need for worker retraining because we didn't have the kind of skills we needed to fill the jobs in our economy. Right. And now we're going to need even more. So the Jobs Act is a good way to do that. Allow Pell Grants to be used for short-term training programs. There are lots of other ways, but I think this will be very important, and you're going to play a leading role in that. I know, Secretary Scalia, because I know you have been involved in training. Let me just, if I could, talk for a second about how we got to where we are, because it's 10 weeks into this unemployment insurance program that was started in the CARES Act, and where we go from here. We chose $600 for a simple reason, and Senator Wyden, I think, said it well when he said it was rough justice. It was rough justice for trying to make sure that people, on average, had wage replacement. But I think, for everybody, what we all were looking for was wage replacement. And $600 is well above wage replacement for a lot of people. And the University of Chicago study that was cited earlier today is that 60 to 70% of the people on unemployment insurance making $600 federal addition to the state benefit, 60 to 70% of them are making more on UI than they would make in their previous jobs. So there is this issue. And look, the last session I had with anybody in Ohio was on Monday before I flew here. It was a small business. And the third thing the guy said to me was what you hear from small businesses when you do your NFIB conference calls, which I do periodically and so on, which is I now am finally able to reopen and we're starting to get business back. Things are going better, but I can't find people. And people were telling me I'd rather stay on UI because I can make more money there. And, well, you know, with 60 to 70% of people making more money on UI than they make in their jobs, that's going to happen. I agree people actually want to go back to work. I think it's wrong to say that people want to stay on UI. I think people like being at work, but when they can make a lot more money not being at work, it does create a disincentive. I had a town hall recently, teletown hall. I'm doing these pretty much every week now. And a woman called in and said, I've got 2 daughters, one of whom is working, one's on UI, and the one on UI is making more than the one who's working. And the one who's working is upset about that because they had jobs that were comparable prior to this. So, I mean, this is a reality. We have to face it. But it was all good intentions because we were trying to find that average wage was about $600 per month additional federal benefit to get the average wage so it would be comparable. And so I think it was rough justice, but I think now we're in a different situation. One, we've got an economy that is starting to grow. And the numbers for last month were really surprising. We thought we'd lose 7.5 million jobs, and we added 2.5 million jobs. I mean, no one should say that's not great news. However, there's still 21 million people who are on the unemployment rolls. It's over 13% unemployment. For African Americans, even higher. Hispanics, even higher. So we do have a huge problem here. The $600 was necessary, in my view, to get us started in this. But now we have a situation where the economy is starting to reopen, and people are looking for workers. Second, remember, back then, we really didn't want people to stay at work because we were encouraging people to go home. In other words, we were shutting down the economy. Except for essential businesses, we were actually encouraging people not to be working. Now we want to encourage people to work. So this is why I come to this proposal I've been working on for the past couple of months with you and other people, which is to say, for people who are on unemployment making whatever the state benefit is, usually it's about $360 on average from the state, plus they're making the $600 federal addition to that. For those people who are on unemployment making more than they could make at work, which is 60 to 70% of those people, why not give them a bonus to go back to work? That bonus could come out of the $600. That bonus, I've suggested, could be $450. Why? Because that's the amount which would make people even if they were on minimum wage in this country. So anybody on minimum wage would be able to go back and make just as much, if not more, in the private sector than they could make on UI if they had this bonus. For us, it would be a 6-week program. So it's a transition back to work. I really like it because I think it gets people back to work at a time we need them in the economy, but also because it's good for workers. Work is where most people get their health care, right, Mr. Secretary? Most people in America get their health care from work, and they lose it when they lose their job, unless they've got a great company that's furloughing them and paying their health care, but that's rare. Second, that's where they get their retirement if they have a retirement account. Typically, it's a 401k at work. But also, I think the meaning of work is important to people. I think the self-respect you get from going to work is important to people. So we want to encourage people to go back to work. It's clearly good for small businesses who are looking hard for workers right now if they're starting to reopen, and that's good. And, of course, it's good for the taxpayer, because think about it. If instead of $600, it's $450, the federal government saves money, but so does the state government, because then the people are off unemployment insurance and back on the payrolls, and they're actually paying taxes, by the way. So even taking out the fact they're now paying taxes and contributing to the economy, that alone, taking them off the federal $600 down to $450, whatever the number is, and Congress may choose another number, and not having the $360 on average state benefit, it's tens of billions of dollars in savings to the state governments and the federal governments, which is savings to the taxpayer. That's a win-win-win. Good for workers, good for businesses, good for the taxpayer. Now, having said all that, what do you think about it, Mr. Secretary? Don't you think that makes sense in order to get people back to work?
I do think it makes sense to get people back to work. We've got to have an unemployment insurance safety net, but for the reasons that you gave, work is even better. And so I look forward to Senator Portman speaking with you and others about what we might do going forward. I'm certainly not here to criticize the CARES Act. I think the CARES Act is a really admirable achievement by the United States government during an extremely difficult time. But if it was rough justice, let's find justice. Let's use these months, these weeks to make things even better. And I think we are in a different situation.
Let's delve into that a little bit. I mean, I would love to find justice. In other words, to be able to say, what is wage replacement?
Senator Whitehouse.
But I don't believe that the UI systems around the country, we'll find out from the second panel when they come up to talk, are capable of doing that. I think they're going to want one flat number. They've had enough difficulty doing that. Unfortunately, I think that's where we are. So let's do something that makes sense to deal with the immediate problem we have to get people back to work and provide an incentive to do so. Thank you, Mr.
Senator Whitehouse.
Mr. Secretary, does the Department of Labor have a specific counterproposal, Senator Portman's or any other, to extending the $600 benefit past July?
Senator Whitehouse, I don't have a particular proposal that I would want to air at this hearing.
Okay.
I certainly am interested in discussing what steps might be taken. I've already
you answered my question.
I think it would help the viewers to know
please,
that.
Mr. Secretary, you have tried to talk over us through this whole hearing. That was a simple question. Just let me go through my questions, would you please? The second question is with respect to the fraud investigations in unemployment insurance. We are seeing in Rhode Island and in other states a fraud that looks like it is massive, coordinated, and perhaps driven from overseas. How much of a priority is investigating and remedying that fraud for your department? High, low, super high? Give me a measure.
To complete my answer, because I'm sorry, I had not completed my answer to your question. I have had a conversation with Ranking Member Wyden about this, what we might do going forward, and I look forward to further discussions on those lines. With respect to Senator Whitehouse, with respect to fraud on the unemployment insurance system, it is a very high priority for us. We recognize that unemployment insurance fraud has always been a long-standing problem in the system. We recognize that because of the size, the prominence of the CARES program, it's become an acute problem. And so it's one that I am certainly personally spending my time working with my staff to address. And I know you have more questions, so I won't repeat everything I said earlier, but we're working with the states,
you're having
the
fun
federal partners and others.
This has become a little bit of a sport for you to filibuster us and kind of yuck it up. I don't think that's fair to us. With respect to the OSHA guidelines related to COVID, what is the difference between an OSHA guideline and an OSHA emergency temporary standard with respect to enforceability?
A standard is a legally enforceable rule, which we already have a number of that we believe we can use for enforcement with respect to COVID. We also have a statutory tool that we can use for
But to be clear, the COVID-related guidelines that you spoke about earlier are not standards that OSHA is capable of enforcing against. It is only if they overlap with another pre-existing actual standard that you can enforce against them. Is that not a correct statement of the law?
That's respectfully not entirely true, actually. Guidelines that we issue, which are consistent with those issued by the CDC and those adopted by industries, recommended by unions and the like, establish a legal background at which I believe we can bring a general duty clause action if we need to. The other difference between guidelines and a standard is
May I read you something from your website? OSHA guidelines are advisory, do not create new employer obligations, and are not the basis for citations. And then further down, it actually says the recommendations contained as guidelines are not enforceable under the general duty standards either. So it looks to me like it's hard to enforce.
Respectfully, I was the chief legal officer at the department,
so I'm here to ask
I was the chief legal officer at the department previously. And as I said, a guideline can provide part of the background for an action. The other difference between a guideline
but background
and a
and
standard is the
enforceability are two different
flexibility
things, are they
guideline
not?
gives us.
Final point, there's been a lot of, I think, scorn heaped on the $600 a week benefit, which propped up probably close to 40 million families now through this crisis, and that people are overpaid and idle and all of that. But just for context in evaluating that narrative, I would also remind everybody who's watching this hearing that 43,000 Americans who enjoy incomes over $1 million got a benefit from the CARES legislation amounting on average to over $1.6 million each, not for their businesses, but flowing back to their personal tax returns. The amount that flowed back to individuals earning over $1 million each to their personal tax returns as a result of this, $1.6 million on average for those 43,000 people, was over $100 billion. So let's just bear that in mind as we evaluate what it means to a family struggling to get by to have an extra $600. I think we probably do need to rethink this program, but it would help if we had a proposal from the Department of Labor. Thank you. My time is up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I represent a very big aerospace cluster. About 150,000 people are involved in aerospace, both working for Boeing as a manufacturer, but also the supply chain. So we worked very hard on getting the CARES Act to support activity that would get capital into those areas, and also to try to focus on what we could do to protect essential workers. I'm sending you a letter today asking for trade adjustment assistance for workers who are impacted at Boeing, and so I hope that you will look favorably on that petition. I don't know if you want to make any comments about that, but one of the issues that I think we really have to think hard about is that we want to maintain our competitiveness in aerospace. These are highly paid jobs, and when people get laid off, because obviously we've been impacted by this and the whole transportation sector has been impacted, then those people who get laid off may have a package that keeps them connected to the company for a while. I was a big advocate of saying that critical defense workers should have extra health care benefit activity so that when this crisis is over, they'd be more likely to come back into the fold, and that we wouldn't lose these critical defense workers. As it is, we ran into a big roadblock. So much of the discussion this afternoon has been around the $600 and extending that. My question is really more on health care. What are we going to do to keep critical workers in this sector that we would like to keep them in is after their 1 month of COBRA benefits runs out, and we're now talking about aerospace engineers, that they are then on the hook for paying for their health care themselves. They can continue that COBRA benefit, but if they pay for it themselves, which again is a big out-of-pocket expense. So my worry is what's going to happen to those aerospace workers is they're going to find another job that has health care because they're not going to wait a year from now for the aerospace market to pick back up. So what do we need to do? If you want to comment on the TAA or the benefits of trying to provide assistance to aerospace manufacturing from trade adjustment, but also what is your plan? What do you think the plan should be for keeping critical workers connected by having some sort of health care benefit that's out there and available in an affordable way?
I'll certainly look carefully at the TAA letter. I recognize that the Trade Adjustment Assistance Act is an important form of relief to industries, companies that have been affected, and we'll certainly take a look at that.
And I'm saying they were affected before this, obviously. The whole sector was affected because of trade issues.
Yes, and by the way, I certainly share your view that it's a very important sector for this country for a number of different reasons. With respect to health care, providing it is always important and often a challenge. We extended the time that people would have to elect COBRA benefits during the pandemic, so people had more time to evaluate that option, and in the rush of everything else going on, didn't lose out on those benefits as a result of the sort of ordinary deadlines that apply. I'll have to give further thought to mechanisms that might be used to induce people back to aerospace jobs, perhaps through a health care benefit, rather than having them go elsewhere that might be of less importance to national security or the like. It's not an issue that I've looked at, but I'd certainly be interested in talking to you about that aspect of this problem further.
Well, it's one of the highest paid manufacturing jobs that we still have in the United States,
Yep.
and I think the second 100 years of aerospace could be a very big opportunity as the rest of the world continues to grow economically in the future and gets into aerospace. So I would hope that we would figure out how to upskill these workers and also figure out this health care benefit, because if they don't have health care, they're not going to stick around waiting for us, even if they're on TAA. We got to figure out how to get the health care benefit to these workers and get them back into aerospace and maintain U.S. competitiveness. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Mr. Secretary. Good to be with you. I appreciate you visiting today. Most states, including Indiana, waive job search requirements as it relates to unemployment insurance in order to encourage people to shelter in place, to stay at home, to prevent further spread of the coronavirus. But now, as all of our states begin to varying degrees to reopen, employers are recalling their workers or hiring new workers to get their businesses up and running and try to resume some semblance of normalcy. But they're having difficulty doing so because of the additional UI plus-up, which I know has been discussed at some length today. So what I'm wondering, Mr. Secretary, is at what point states will feel it's reasonable for workers to be expected to search for work as a condition of receiving further unemployment insurance. Is this something your department has given some consideration to?
Senator, thank you. And the work search requirements are ones that are part of the unemployment law infrastructure that the CARES Act was enacted on top of. And although there were states that, for example, sought to waive the weekly certification requirement, we have asked that that requirement continue to be honored. I certainly agree that, especially as the economy is now reopening, as jobs are becoming available, it is important that states begin applying the usual mechanisms to encourage workers to look for work. We appreciate that it's a difficult balance for them. We still want them also to be able to be getting payments out to people who need them, are entitled to them. But we know now that millions of jobs are reopening. We want to get people back there.
Can you give me some sense of how states are approaching this, what timelines they might be looking at as it relates to resuming the normal work search requirements, and what expectations are being made of workers as they engage in this work search, and what is a somewhat different environment?
We expect them now to be applying the weekly certification requirement that they have. We appreciate that a few weeks ago some wanted out of that for a period of time, but we've asked them to comply with that requirement. And I think, again, now it's taking on more value, more importance. Something that I've suggested to the governors, I sent a letter to the governors at the end of last week talking to them really about these kinds of questions, that there's still work to be done providing benefits, but the economy is reopening. So there's now this new job of, for example, having employers let unemployment commissioners know when they're open for business, or having the state workforce agencies informed when employers are open for business and working with the people on unemployment to get them back to work. We have these workforce agencies in the states to help people make that transition. And I think now, increasingly, their services are being called on, and we want them to do that job too.
Excellent. Thank you. So many Hoosiers have lost their jobs over the course of the coronavirus, and many won't have a job to go back to. For others, they won't have a job to go back to for some period of time. And still others may find that they've created a new job for themselves, or they can find a new job that didn't exist prior to the pandemic. You may have spoken to this earlier. I know it's been a long day for you, and I'm appreciative of your presence here for such a period of time. But do we know what jobs won't be coming back post-pandemic, and what jobs have been created as a result of the pandemic?
It's a good question. This has been such a challenging stretch for American workers that I hesitate to point out the positives that have been there, but there have been some. I mean, we have seen some companies hire, in some cases, hundreds of thousands of workers, particularly some of the larger retailers have done that. And I think we can imagine some areas that will see further growth as the result of some changes in lifestyle that people are now making as a result of the virus. There are other industries that are going to take longer, and we know that. I've met with workers in the hotel sector and business owners in the hotel sector, and that's going to take longer. Likewise, we know the sports industry will take longer, but I think we can bring them back.
We have two questioners left before I call on Senator Cortez Masto and Mr. Daines. We're not going to have a second round, but I am going to, as a matter of privilege, give Senator Wyden, he asked for 2 minutes, and if he wants a response from you, I hope you can respond in 2 minutes, because we're holding up the second panel. So Senator Cortez Mastos, by TV, I think.
I am here. Thank you. Secretary Scalia, thank you. It has been a long afternoon, and I appreciate you coming and answering all the questions. Let me say, you were just touching on an industry that is hardest hit. I'm from Nevada. We're a hospitality, tourism, gaming-based destination. Unfortunately, we have the highest unemployment rate in the country. Unfortunately, what we have seen through our unemployment insurance, our Department of Employment, Training, and Rehabilitation, we've actually received more than 500,000 claims for standard unemployment insurance and nearly 100,000 for pandemic unemployment insurance. And that's with a state, with a population of just about 3 million people. So can you talk a little bit about how you anticipate addressing unemployment for the hospitality and tourism-based industry? You know, when I'm in banking and Chairman Powell and I had this conversation, I asked him which industry you think it's going to take the longest to bounce back, and he referred to the hospitality and tourism base. So what are you thinking for purposes of unemployment and how we should be addressing the long-term unemployment that we may be seeing in hospitality and tourist-based industries?
Thank you for the question. And yes, I spoke with Governor Sisolak, I think, just last week about Nevada's reopening. And I know that Las Vegas is now beginning to reopen, which is wonderful news. But I know that it will be a process that takes place over a period of time. And as I mentioned a moment ago, I do appreciate that it's a sector of the economy that's going to be slower coming back, unfortunately, than others. I think that we're seeing the rest of the country reopen safely. I just read that Disney, I think, is going to begin opening its facilities, I believe, later in the month. So I'm hopeful that some of these business places that depend more for business on large gatherings are not far behind, and that the reopening in Las Vegas, Nevada can also proceed more quickly. But that said, I appreciate that we do need to continue to watch how these things develop over the next month or so, next few weeks, and evaluate whether there are additional steps that have to be taken post July 30. And the circumstance that you have in Nevada, I do believe, is one that is going to warrant watching and perhaps further discussion about how things are progressing and what steps might be needed for the benefit of the workers and businesses there.
Such as extending unemployment insurance for those workers.
I think that it makes sense to talk about the situation that workers are in come the end of July, and what particular mechanisms an unemployment piece could be one part of that I agree is worth discussing, or particularly if you're able to target it in certain ways.
Yeah, and please know that part of our industry too is that gig economy industry. That includes our entertainers. That includes individuals that are seasonal, stage crew, promotion. So for purposes of that industry, which is really the new economy, I'm curious what you're thinking for purposes of the future, and even now, and how we address their unemployment needs. I understand Senator Warner said this is an area we should be focused on. What are you doing to address this issue? Because so many of them, it is the new economy. We should be looking at how we provide unemployment. Many are misclassified, as you well know. And so what are you looking at to address this new economy and these workers?
Senator, the audio cut out just a little bit, but I think you were asking about workers that are often treated as independent contractors, so-called gig workers, self-employed. And as I mentioned earlier, providing unemployment benefits to them, a form of unemployment benefit in the CARES Act, was an important thing to be done, given how they were affected in much the same way as many other workers. I think there are other things that can be done to help people in that segment of the economy. Something that we proposed, we adopted a rule for what we called association health plans to make it easier for the self-employed, as well as for people who work for small businesses, to band together to buy health insurance. Senator Warner earlier mentioned some ideas that he has for gig workers. I think that's a segment of the economy that is really important. I think there are many workers out there who like the independence that comes with having a job of that nature, but it does make sense to talk about ways to adapt some of what we do for workers in light of the particular line of work that those people are in.
Thank you. Thank you. I notice my time is up. Thank you, Chairman.
You bet. Thank you. And now, Senator from Oregon for 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to correct the record on some of the key issues. First, when I talked to the Secretary, last week on one of the key questions of why we had to have a $600 a week supercharged benefit, the Secretary said that the state still didn't have the ability to do full wage replacement, which I would have been happy to do in the first instance. Today, he said, seems like they made a lot of progress, and I don't know what might have happened over the weekend, Mr. Secretary, but I think that's just misleading the committee, it's misleading the public, and on a key kind of question, which is what to do going forward. Because I've indicated, and I've mentioned some of my colleagues being open to this, that I'm open to a variety of approaches, but it doesn't help when we have misleading comments. And that was the case in several other areas. Both myself and Senator Casey asked about this question of whether an unemployed person could turn down an unsafe job and continue to claim unemployment insurance. You said repeatedly that was a matter of state law. We've been looking at it. It's not. When it's pandemic coverage, then you have the capacity as the Secretary of Labor to give the states guidance, which is what we've been asking you about for the last 3 hours. And finally, I was just stunned by this. You said that, well, isn't it great that we've all been able to agree on the pandemic coverage, which we called the gig workers and the self-employed and the like. And I just went back and looked at the record, and the fact is that the McConnell bill was 8 lines long, and it had nothing to do with those workers. And it was because people on this side of the aisle said that a program that began in the 1930s, it was time to modernize it and bring it in to the next century. We'd like to work with you, but it doesn't help when on key issue after issue. And I understand being lawyerly. I'm a lawyer in name only, ran the legal aid office for the elderly. But that's different than being misleading. And I think on too many key issues today, you are simply misleading, and I think it's going to make our job harder because we want to do a bipartisan bill, which is actually what we came out of the committee room the first time before we got to the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
If you want to answer, please do it in 2 minutes.
Thank you. And Ranking Member Wyden, I hope we can continue talking about different mechanisms that might be available there. The approach that I think that I suggested to you when we spoke last week was one which resembled in some ways what we discussed in March, which was potentially involving the Treasury Department in helping disperse benefit for unemployed workers. That actually is an approach that would have included the states since they have critical information. That said, I actually have learned more since you and I spoke. We've had discussions with states. We've learned more. And I confess I am, as I sit here now, more optimistic about the capabilities that the states may have based on the conversations that we've continued to have. And so I look forward to exploring that further with you. But the more recent information that I've gotten has been encouraging. And then with respect to safe workplaces, I'm sorry that you don't feel that it's as clear as you'd like, but as I said, we want safe workplaces. We don't expect people to be forced back to workplaces that are unsafe. The unemployment standards are, as you know, state administered. We've provided guidance, I think including guidance regarding at least some circumstances where we would expect workers can safely return. But if we hear from states that that's an area where they need further guidance, we'll certainly have those discussions with them. Thank you.
Mr. Secretary, you've had a long afternoon here, and you've been a well-attended committee meeting. All but 3 members came to have dialogue with you. I thank you for your patience, and I also appreciate the cooperation of our staff of our members through all of this. So I'll excuse you now, and then while our staff is putting up the nameplates, I'll start to introduce first Scott Sanders. Mr. Sanders is Executive Director of the National Association of State Workforce Agencies. That's an organization of state workforce system administrators. It goes by the acronym NASWA. Prior to joining that organization, he served as Commissioner of the Indiana Department of Workforce Development. Next, we hear from an Iowan, Beth Townsend. Ms. Townsend is Director of Iowa Workforce Development, appointed by Governor Branstad, confirmed unanimously by the Iowa Senate March 24, 2015. Previous to that, her present position, she was Director of the Iowa Civil Rights Commission. Prior to that, she worked as an attorney in West Des Moines, Iowa. in civil rights and employment law. Ms. Townsend also served as a member of the Judge Advocate General Corps of the U.S. Air Force. She retired from the Air Force Reserve after 21 years of both active and reserve duty. Third is Jose Javier Rodriguez. Mr. Rodriguez is a member of the Florida Senate representing the 37th District, including Coral Gables, Pinecrest, Key Biscayne, and downtown Miami, and he's been in the Senate since 2016. He previously served 2 terms in the Florida House of Representatives. Next, Les Neely, president of the Neely Canvas Goods Company in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Mr. Neely runs a family-owned business operating since 1940, which produces residential awnings and tarps for commercial trucking and other uses. Been able to bring all of his employees back to work, which he will tell us about doing that. Then we hear from Michelle Evermore. Ms. Evermore is a senior policy analyst for the National Employment Law Project. Ms. Evermore joined that organization 2018. Prior to that, she worked in Congress for a decade in the Senate and also was a staff person for the House Committee on Education and the Workforce. In those roles, Ms. Evermore worked to advance worker protections, organizing rights, and to improve retirement security in a variety of private pension plan designs, as well as Social Security. I'm sure the staff has informed everybody that if you have longer than 10 minutes, or longer than 5-minute statement that you want put in the record, it will be put in the record. And I will start with Mr. Sanders, then Ms. Townsend, well, kind of the way I introduced you. So let's go with Mr. Sanders.